Hello dear viewers, this is OBN Horn of Africa. I'm your host Thomas Gamulato. Today I have a guest. His name is Kia. He will tell you about his profile a little bit. Really it's nice to have you on our program. Would you tell us about your profile a bit?
Thank you very much. My name is Kia Tsagay. Professionally, I'm a lawyer. I consult various local and international companies and organizations. I also do some research on legal matters, contemporary legal matters.
Okay, it's nice really. To begin with, the current situation in our country, there is a clash in our north area. The federal government has taken the operation to secure the law enforcement measure. How do you see that thing, and what is its symbolic importance for peace and stability of the country?
Thank you very much. I think, yes, as you said, the federal government has launched law enforcement operations since early November, starting after the TPLF clique attacked the Ethiopian armed forces, the Northern Command. The federal government had no option but to enforce the law of the land. The attack of this criminal group was targeted at destabilizing the state, violating the sovereignty, and attacking the very important institution that we have, which is our national defense forces. So the federal government has tried, has been patient. Maybe we can raise it later on, but has been very patient about the acts of this the TPLF group. They have been violating the fundamental principles of the constitution. So after all that violations, finally they crossed the rail line, which is attacking the army and taking over the heavy weapons that were purchased by the taxpayers' money, and they also killed the innocent the defense forces while they were asleep. It was high treason, you know. So in this situation, the government, the federal government, didn't have any other option but to enforce the law of the land to prevent the disintegration of the state.
Okay, it's all about law enforcement. Some people say it is a war or civil war. How do you see this?
I think that it doesn't have any elements that shows that this operation is a civil war, because there is a criminal group that violated the fundamental laws of the country, the fundamental principles of the constitution provisions, and this group has to be brought to the justice. And this group doesn't even have the support base. So the very people that they claim to represent were not supporting it. So there is no any indication, or there is no any element that shows that this operation is civil war. This is a propaganda by the people, the international media, to show to the world, to international community, that this law enforcement operation is a civil war, so that if there is a civil war, there is a possibility of sitting on table to negotiate with the federal government. So after committing this treasonous crime on the Ethiopian Defense Forces and Ethiopian people at large, the TPLF wanted to picture this scenario as a civil war, so that they will be brought to negotiating table, and they get what they wanted, what they demanded through violence. So as you remember, the TPLF clique has also attacked towns in Ethiopia, in Bahar Dar and Gondar. They have fired rockets even in Asmara, in Eritrea.
Sure.
So bringing Eritrea into this matter will internationalize, regionalize the conflict. So in this case, they were like inviting international community to facilitate negotiated settlement.
Well, that was my point.
Yeah,
That's why the international media is focused on.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
a kind of life-saving propaganda. You know, these guys, because they were on power for some 3 decades in Ethiopia, they have a big network. And they by the money they looted from Ethiopia, we believe and we have every reason to suspect that they have been financing some of the international experts, quote unquote, analysts, human rights institutions, media institutions. So what you see on the ground and what the international media talks about this operation is totally different. So it's very sad that even after being attacked,
Yeah.
the Ethiopian government is criticized for enforcing the law of the land and trying to bring this criminal group to justice.
Justice, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. How do you get the government's patience on the action that the legal group, actually this is a bunch of criminals
Yes.
who gathered somewhere in Mekelle or around there.
Yeah.
How do you see, especially in the last 2 years,
Yeah.
how do you see the government has made a lot of negotiations to create table and to talk on it.
Yes.
How do you see that?
Well, the government was very patient, the federal government, even to the extent some even the supporters of the reform and the change were also losing hope on the federal government, because almost every week there was havoc, atrocities, chaos, almost every part of the country except in Tigray region. As you have heard from the Prime Minister's parliamentary speech, there were more than 100 conflicts and violent clash, communal clash, religious clash, almost in all regions except Tigray region. So people were asking why the government is silent and why the government is not taking a serious measure to bring these criminals to justice. You know, these guys started their violence immediately after the coming of the change in Ethiopia.
Sure.
In April 2018, they went to Mekelle and they have been always provoking the federal government to enter into conflict. So by the connections they have, by the dominance they have in the military, by the access they have to the Ethiopian national security institutions, they were trying to provoke the federal government, and the federal government was very patient. I think to some extent that's understandable, because these guys were wanting conflicts at early stage. So the government had to be silent, patient on them because of various factors. So as you said, the government was very patient, but you know, these guys, they established electoral commission in contrary to the Ethiopian federal constitution, and
Sure.
Article 102. There is only one national electoral board, and they went to their parliament, their regional council, and they enacted a legislation, and they established a regional election commission. Finally, they also conducted election, you know, quote unquote election, and in which they took all the seats and 98.6% of the vote. So it's ridiculous that, especially when at the time of the election, that's, you know, quote unquote election, because with all the standards, I don't think it should be election. I don't want to call it election because it doesn't, for all legal and practical purposes, it doesn't fulfill the basic requirements of election. So the government was even patient after they conducted this so-called election. And they also said there is no government, federal government. We don't recognize any federal government after October 5. They also rejected the binding constitutional interpretation on postponement of the national election due to COVID. The binding interpretation, constitutional interpretation provided by the House of Federation. And they also rejected the newly assigned military officials, generals, commanders, who were supposed to go to the Northern Command. They sent them back to Addis from the airport. They also rejected the restructuring of the army, the Northern Command. And you know, with all this arrogance, the government was very patient, and people were about to lose hope because what this criminal group has been doing was very serious and been affecting the daily life of every Ethiopian. So I think now, you know, on November 4, they crossed the rail line, and the government was forced to enforce the law of the land.
Yeah, it's good, really. You know, the government has made operation, the law enforcement operation on Tigray or TPLF.
Yeah.
It has given them 372 hours.
Yeah, yeah.
The steps that the government has taken
Yes.
Was very really appreciated.
Yes.
Is that fair, or is that appropriate to let the people come to the line?
Yeah, I think it's just there are two ways of bringing criminals into to justice. You know, one is through force. The second one is through you know, a kind of surrender. So the better way, the better way, which doesn't have any adverse consequence on their physical, if they surrendered peacefully within the period of time that the government gave them, things would have been good. You know, we hear some of these criminals were wounded at the war front in the battlefield. Some of their supporters, there were so many casualties. So the government's intention, by giving the ultimatum, like 72 hours, 3 days, 2 days, you know, it was meant to prevent casualties, especially civilian casualties. When you try to enforce the law, and when you try to bring these criminals to justice, of course there will be some kind of consequences. At the end of the day is a battlefield, you know. So in order to minimize the consequence, the adverse consequence, it would have been great if these people used the time that they were given by the federal government. But unfortunately, it is not in their nature to give in, you know. It's not in their nature to be responsible. They have been irresponsible in the past 27 years. Even after losing power in the past 1 year and a half, they have been irresponsible. They don't care about the people. They don't care about even their members, you know, the low-level ordinary members, you know. So you see, when they were losing the battle, they started to demolish public infrastructures. The Aksum airport, which was built by, with more than $500 million, it was demolished, you know, totally destroyed. They have been demolishing bridges. They have been destroying roads. So what you see from them is you expect surrender from someone responsible. Now, I have lost the war. I have lost the battle. I don't have to expose my people to worse situation. So I have to give it. I have to surrender and face justice. This is not what they think. This is not in their nature. So fortunately, the government has been very responsible. Within 3 weeks of law enforcement, there was a very minimal consequence on civilians. With recent history, I have never seen this kind of successful law enforcement operation, even at African level. So it's a very good move that government gave them the ultimatum.
Is that the only option? Is that the last option to bring them to the
justice? So I think that the government has used all options exhaustively. So if you remember, religious leaders and traditional leaders, Shimagiles or Jarsota, they were sent to Mekelle in June, I think, in June or July, to find a way of kind of reconciliation between the federal government and the TPLF leadership. And after staying some days, these senior citizens were sent back to Addis by the TPLF that the TPLF leadership said we are not going to negotiate, and unless other parties are involved, we will not directly negotiate face to face with the federal government. This is just a lame excuse, It's a lost opportunity. Even after that, they have been provoking the federal government in various ways. So, if you like any self-respecting government in the world, if this government is in the shoes of the Ethiopian government, what do they do? Like, if an American army base, one of their base, is attacked by one of the state's police, or I don't know whether they have a special force like us, what would the American government do, the federal government? It will crush them. There is no negotiation, The red line has been crossed.
Sure.
And the under international law, the United Nations Charter, the sovereign states are empowered to enforce law, to enact law, interpret and enforce law. So this is one of the basic rights of any sovereign state. So law has been broken, the fundamental constitutional provisions were broken, and the one of the main state institutions, the Federal Defense Forces, the Northern Command, was attacked. What do we expect the federal government to do? To sit down and negotiate with the perpetrators, the criminals? I mean, this is absurd. Any government, whether it's democratic or not, whether it's a unitary form of government or a federal form of government, it doesn't matter whether it's developed or developing country. So when these fundamental basic laws of the country are broken, the central government or the federal government has no option but to enforce the law of the land and bring the perpetrators. So I think the government has tried all options, and the TPLF leadership saw the patience of the federal government as a fear, or they became arrogant. There is no one like us. We are battle hardened. There is no fighter than us. We know how to wage war. We know how to, we are the best military strategist. This was the rhetoric. This arrogance led them to mess with the federal army, and they are getting what they deserve.
Okay, that's good. There is a clash in Tigray, Mekelle.
Yeah.
Maybe there is human rights and civil rights violation there. How do you protect this, and tell us about the international experience in this regard?
Humanitarian matters.
Definitely.
Okay, so like any other world, when you enforce law, or when you conduct operations, I don't say it will be, everything is gonna be all right, and no one will be affected. Obviously, there are civilians who are exposed to various human rights violations, including, due to the disconnection of the telecom services, due to disconnection of the road and the air transport. I'm sure our citizens in Tigray region were seriously affected. That's obvious. But the government, the federal government, I think starting from last week, has started to work on rehabilitation activities.
Yeah.
I have seen food items, drugs, and other medical supplies were sent to Tigray region by the federal government. I think the federal government also has agreed with the United Nations and the other humanitarian agencies to rehabilitate and support those citizens who were affected by this conflict. So I think Ethiopia is not new for this kind of disaster management. There are also some 40,000 Ethiopian citizens who fled to Sudan due to fear of the conflict. By the way, Ethiopia is not new also for hosting and protecting refugees. There are more than 700,000 refugees in Ethiopia, refugees from South Sudan, Republic of Somalia, and Eritrea. So it's not new for us how to manage this kind of problems and challenges. So I think compared to what the international analysts, quote unquote, and journalists were reporting, the consequence on the civilian was very minimal, I can say. It's, the law enforcement operation was done with a minimum cost. People were, some news outlets were reporting Mekelle is going to be bombed, Mekelle is under siege, and 7 million people in Tigray region are exposed to disaster, famine, a lot of negative news. These they're sponsored by the TPLF and their cronies. So when you see the reality, Mekelle is becoming peaceful. The public service is being open by the new administration, the transitional administration. So I'm not saying things were all right. No one was not, no one is affected. I'm not saying that, because at the end of the day, this is a law enforcement. There were some adverse impacts on the peaceful people. So the major issue should be how to rehabilitate these innocent individuals and people in Tigray region. So I think the federal government has started supporting these people who are affected by this law enforcement in Mekelle, in Shire, on all towns. Public service is also starting to be operational. So the services like power and clean water is being provided and started. I think telecom service has also been started partially. So I think things will be all right, and the Tigrayan people will also really come to understand how the TPLF have marginalized the very people that it claims to represent.
Okay, to sustain the ongoing peace and security of the region, what the people of the region should do?
Yeah, I think first of all, I really appreciate the ordinary individuals and the citizens in Tigray region that they have not engaged in armed confrontation with the federal army. As we see from various interviews, people are really friendly with the army. For that matter, this army has been supporting local communities in various aspects. This army, the people of Tigray have a positive attitude about the Ethiopian armed forces, because these army has been building schools, health stations, roads, various developmental activities. So from the very beginning, the Treasonous Act was committed by the TPLF and its clique, small group of not more than 200 or 300 individuals who defected from Ethiopian army, the regional militia, police, and the top leadership. So the ordinary people, if you go to in the countryside in Tigray region and ask about their attitude on the Ethiopian Defense Force, they have more than positive understanding and attitude about our army. So the Tigray region, the people in Tigray should collaborate with the Ethiopian Defense Forces in finalizing this law enforcement in Tigray region. Secondly, the people should also work hand in hand with the new administration, the interim or the transitional administration of Tigray region, and people should also engage in pacifying or in maintaining peace and the stability of the region, because they are the ultimate protectors of the peace and the stability of the region.
Yeah, that's good. Let's go back to the foundation of Prosperity Party and the abolition of EPRDF as well as TPLF. What is its legal ground? And because the TPLF are claiming it's not a legal party because it doesn't have any door in Tigray region or even in the country. They are claiming that because they conduct their own election on, they say, on time.
Yes.
What is its legal ground and what your view on this?
Well, on the formation of one unified or centralized party, in fact, the TPLF leadership were the first who were raising about or who were talking about the importance of having one merged party, centralized party. We have seen some of the speeches of senior leadership of the TPLF, like Suyum Masfin, We have seen them in one of the EPRDF Congress. They have been promoting the importance of forming or merging these ethnic-based regional parties into one unified party. So first of all, it was in discussion since long time. Secondly, the EPRDF, as you know, is a party, a front of four parties, and this has marginalized the other parts of the other section of our people, like Somali region, Benishangul, Gumuz, Gambela, and Afar, and Harari. These parties, ruling parties in these regions, were considered just subordinates, like allied parties or affiliate parties. So they didn't have any power or a say in the core governance issues of this country. So EPRDF was marginalizing this big section of our population. And the other one is, according to our electoral laws, parties can apply for merger after making final decision by their higher body, executive organ of each party. So the formation of the Prosperity Party followed all the procedures, the laws of the land, according to Ethiopian electoral board, electoral laws, as I've said. If the parties, individual parties, have agreed at their higher level to be one party or unified party, it's up to the decision of the executive committee of each party. So accordingly, the previous EPRDF front members like ODP, ADP, and Southern Ethiopian People's Democratic Movement, these three parties, which constitute more than 50% of the whole EPRDF or the front, have decided to be one unified party, and the National Electoral Board have accepted their application. Based on their application, the National Board reviewed independently about the process and justified and approved the merger, and the TPLF refused. It's up to them to whether to be included in the Prosperity Party or not, you know. So it's just unjustified and illegal claim, because they know they are not going to be dominant as they were in the EPRDF. So joining the Prosperity Party, they thought would encroach their dominant role in the EPRDF. So from the very beginning, EPRDF was not a party of equals. Even if there are four parties in the EPRDF, obviously its formation was mainly facilitated by the TPLF, and the EPRDF in fact was used as a cover for dominance and the manipulation of the TPLF in the past 27 years. So I think it's just a baseless accusation. So the Prosperity Party, they also accuse the Prosperity Party as a party that promotes a unitary form of government. So there is no mention. I have seen the bylaws of the Prosperity Party, their programs. There is no single statement that says Prosperity Party is striving to establish a unitary form of government. From the very beginning, this federal state structure was stipulated by the Ethiopian constitution. If there is any discussion on the amendment or revision or whatever on the form of government, on the form of the federal system, there needs to be a constitutional amendment. Unless you scrap those specific provisions that empower every nation nationalities to self-administration, just because, even if there is, just because you wrote it on your policy programs, it doesn't mean that you can be able to change the federal state structure. So it's just a baseless accusation by the TPLF and its propagandists that claim that Prosperity Party is pro-unitary form of government. Prosperity Party, as I have seen their document, is a kind of centrist party. It balances the self-administration, the rights of the group to identity, cultural, it respects the diversity, and at the same time, we are one country. There should always be a balance between self-rule and shared rule. So, in fact, we cannot say, even, was there true federalism during the EPRDF time? Very few people from Arakilo were running the whole country. Which regional states chose its own presidents without the blessing of the TPLF? It's we don't have short memory. We really remember how the so-called TPLF advisors were appointed behind the skin, to advise the regional presidents, to manipulate regional presidents. Until recently, some regional states had these advisors. So it was a kind of custodian, fake federalism. So I think that is a baseless accusation, I can say.
What if the TPLF group actually is an illegal group in the country, labeled as terrorist?
Terrorist organization?
Yeah.
Okay.
From your experience or from the international experience, what if they labeled as terrorist?
Yeah, I think for the time being, it's up to the parliament. The House of People's Representative has the power to label any organization with adequate evidence, any organization as a terrorist group. I think for the time being, there should be selective or surgical attack on this group. So if you label the whole party system, the whole membership of the TPLF as terrorist organization, it would be very difficult for, practically speaking, for the transitional government of Tigray region to implement its programs. Because, for instance, the Woreda administration and Kabale administrators will continue their position, as it's a the lowest level of administration. So you cannot replace almost everyone, you know. So according to the proclamation on the formation of the new the regional transitional regional government, the transitional government will only replace those key positions, regional positions and zonal positions, as the Woreda and the Kabale is the lowest form of government. So politically speaking, they are not decision makers. The key people, the decision maker, are the top brass of the party. So I think targeting the top leadership and alienating, separating the ordinary members from the top leadership would be very important. When we see their act, they have been financing terrorism, they have been financing, sponsoring and funding one way or the other way, almost in all regions. They have been promoting violence. So when you see their act, it's an act of terror. It's an act of terrorism according to the new Ethiopian terrorism proclamation. But it would be, I think, counterproductive if you consider each and every member of the TPLF as a terrorist individual. So we should separately attack and target those individuals who directly involved in this criminal activity and unconstitutional activity. So if you label the whole party system, the whole party membership, it will not achieve the objectives of the federal government. So the fact that this party was also a ruling party, if it was kind of a guerrilla, you can label it as a terrorist organization. But the fact that this party was a ruling party, you know, 1 month back, until recently, almost for the past 30 years, they were the ruling party, and their influence is deep. So you can find thousands, hundred thousands of people who are members of this party. So you cannot manage. You don't even have adequate prison if you want to arrest almost every member of this party. So the good way that I advise will be you focus on key individuals who are not more than 200, maybe 300. And the other people, ordinary members, they should either rebrand their party, re-establish another party, or they can join one of the existing opposition political parties who are operating in Tigray region. One thing I want to add or comment is regarding the international media. So it's really unfortunate that most of the commentators, the so-called analysts and researchers, are really propagating or disseminating false information. They are disinforming the international community. First, when the war or the law enforcement started, they said it's going to be protracted war, it's going to be regional civil war, and they said blah blah, a number of issues. And when the government concluded the law enforcement operation within 3 weeks, they said there is humanitarian crisis, there are refugee crisis, and the government still addressing these problems. And some days back, the Prime Minister himself was in Mekelle, and we didn't see any international media that reported this big achievement. And by this law enforcement, I personally observed how the Western media is biased. And I thought, how come we have this much enemies. I mean, we are attacked. Our defense forces' fundamental rights were violated. Our weapons were looted and destroyed, and we were attacked by rockets. How come the international community, the international media, failed to objectively present these crimes against our country, against the state? It's very sad. What you see on the international media is horrible, and I think there should be a coordinated response by the Ethiopian government, civil societies, and all peace-loving Ethiopian citizens, diasporas living abroad. So there should be concerted, organized response to this disinformation, because it's ridiculous what you see on international media. I can mention their name, big medias. Almost every news they report is totally different from the reality on the ground. So that should be addressed. Otherwise, we should have big respect for our defense forces. We should not take this success for granted. I want to ask every Ethiopian that if this criminal group was successful in dividing and destabilizing the state, we would have migrated by this time. We would never sit and discuss about these issues at this time, because their objective was, they have also financiers behind who wants a perpetual instability of our country, so that we will not focus on development agenda. So if this criminal group, this criminal enterprise was successful, it was a disaster. So each and every Ethiopian should value the success of our defense forces and should stand behind our defense forces in any way we can, either materially, financially, whatever. So I want to also, on this occasion, to thank our committed heroes and armed men and women in uniform. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lower Kiya Tsagai, for your time and for your discussion.
Thank you very much.
Dear viewers, this is all about we had with Lower Kiya Tsagai for today. Till next edition, have a wonderful time.